Empower who?
Empower me.
So I came into care as at a few weeks old as a baby. I the story is my mom was 15, too young, didn't know what she was doing, was kind of out in the streets doing her thing. My biological mother, and so I entered foster care like at a few weeks old, and then was adopted at 3. Was adopted by my what was supposed to be my forever family. And after about 10 years with them, they decided they didn't want me anymore. And so I came back into care at 13. And then around like 16, turning 16, I moved to a new state, and went through an adoption that lasted 2 years. And then that one failed. And I ended up coming back into care and aging out of care. So each situation is different. I guess the story is different for each situation, but the first adoption, it was a lot of, there was a lot of abuse, and it wasn't like the state got involved. It was very, now that I'm older and can understand it, I believe it was intentionally crafted and manipulated. And so the family kind of, a lot happened, and the family decided they didn't want me anymore. Technically stating that they couldn't support me and my mental health needs, thinking that the state could do a better job. And then the second adoption, it wasn't a good fit. I felt like I was being forced into adoption after my first one failed. So around 14 is when they started talking about like, you getting adopted, and you grew up in, having a different lifestyle, and you grew up in a 2-parent household. And so, I was always told like I was never asked. I was always told that was we think that you would do better in an adopted home with 2 parents, and their finances are like, no lie, I think I was like 14, and I remember them mentioning about this family that they introduced to me on paper, saying that like they make good money, and then this is what you were used to in your first family. And so, that's definitely one of the things that we paid attention to, and stuff that you probably shouldn't be focused on when you're trying to find a family to adopt, especially a teenager. But ultimately, it just didn't work out. We tried. I didn't get along with the lady's husband, as far as like, it just wasn't a good relationship. And ultimately, it ended because he punched me in the face. And I just,
I almost said the S word. Like, really?
Yeah. It was one of those where, so it was an older African-American couple. And he was a preacher, and she was the first lady. And I was at that point, I didn't hold back. It wasn't bad. So I was always described growing up as being feisty. So it was always like, you're not bad. You don't really like talk back, but you question, because it was just me, right? I had to question. And so it was one of those situations where, I don't know, Anthony, if you've ever experienced this, or Joseph, where like your parents are questioning, like, oh, so you're calling me a liar? And I said yes. And this is an older couple. Not that it made it okay, but it was an older couple. And he was just like, calling me a liar? I said yes. And then I guess out of his own reaction, he like punched me in the face. And I just remember in that moment, they tried to make it work afterwards, but I was just like, I came from a family that this is how I felt. I felt unwanted, and I felt like I was scared of him. And so I just didn't want it again. Now, I didn't know what I was asking for by saying that I didn't want to be adopted and I want to just age out of care, but I knew that I didn't want that feeling. If I was going to be adopted, I wanted to feel like family. I wanted to feel like I belonged, right? And every chance they got, if I did something bad, mind you, I'm like 16, 17, it was like threatening to send me back. So ultimately, I made that decision, but.
So many questions about that. But for the first the people that adopt you originally at 3.
Mhm.
So before I ask that question, did what um did you get a chance to, like, did you know your mom? Did you know that you was being adopted when you was 3 girls? Did you know, like, what the whole
When I
process?
was
Did anybody talk to you?
3,
Yeah.
I don't remember then. I can't remember that far back. I remember growing up with the adoptive family, seeing one picture of me at a young age, like right before I got adopted with my biological mother. Um, but I'm not certain that I was aware of what exactly was going on. I'm 3. So I just think that, yeah, I don't know. And to this day, I've never met my biological mother or my biological father or anyone biologically related to me. I have never met, never had any connection to. So I don't know.
And so what um I don't know. I'm trying to think, like, what what behaviors did you present at such a young age that they was like, uh, no, I renege on a child.
Um, you know, that's that part of my story is just very loaded. So for the purposes of this interview, I will not go too deep into it, but um, now that I'm an adult and I understand it a little more, I really think that mental health played a role. So my adopted mom, so if I refer to my mom, I'm referring to that adoptive family because I didn't know my biological family. So they have always been my mom and dad. And so my
Mhm.
mother, she grew up not in foster care, but in a really bad situation. She was abandoned young. She was raped and molested and abused and not wanted. And so I think, at that time, mental health is just now becoming a conversation, right? The conversation around breaking the stigma behind it and how significant it is and breaking generational curses, like that's a new conversation now. Whereas in that time, no one talked about it. It wasn't addressed. I don't even think it was considered a thing. If you had mental health issues, you were always associated to like a psychiatric hospital. It was
Mhm.
extreme. It wasn't like day to day, your average person could be dealing with depression kind of thing. So as I understand that more, I think that I understand my mom's story more. I think that's what she was dealing with. And I think that, so she had my mom and her husband and my dad, they had 2 biological kids. It was 2 sons, my brothers. And so when they went to adopt me, the story is they were her miracle kids. She was told she wasn't supposed to have kids and she ended up having 2. But my dad wanted a little girl. And so they decided to adopt. And they found me and it was supposed to be this really happy thing. And I was a daddy's girl. Like I was rotten. Anytime he traveled for work. So like across country. So he would bring us all gifts back, but I always got the most elaborate gifts, like Singapore, anywhere in Europe. Like he was like traveling and bringing them back. And so it was obvious, even through my siblings. I just remember like my oldest brother, we would always get into it because I could literally like pinch him. And if he cried, I would just scream and be like, he did it. And like my dad would believe me. Like I was a daddy's girl. And so that's the relationship we had. And so at a certain point, as I got older, I think honestly, my mother did not like that. I think honestly, she may have began to treat me like she was treated. Mind you, now this is my mentality as an adult now. As a child, I didn't understand it. She was my mom. She was supposed to protect me. She was supposed to love me. But every other day she was beating me. She was critiquing me. I was never good enough. And at a certain point when I got older, that was vocalized. You're not good enough. You don't belong
Mm.
in this family. And so I began to believe it. And so, I think as a child, like a child wants to impress their parents. You want to make your parents happy, right? And I'm like, even now as a mom, I see it in my daughter. And so it's when the person that's supposed to love you the most is telling you that you're not impressing me, you're not good enough, you're not worth it, you shouldn't even be here. I gave you this life. Mind you, my dad not knowing that these were the conversations that were being had, um, it just kind of makes it builds this inner hate and disdain for yourself. And I grew up knowing that I didn't have confidence. I grew up knowing that like I didn't like myself. I felt like the reason why my mom hated me so much was because I there was something wrong with me. And so finally going to answer your question, I began to take out all those feelings on myself. So at I think about 13, I started I started cutting myself. So it actually started a little earlier, but 13, it was like a thing that I did. It was my go-to release. And anytime I felt like I wasn't good enough for her, or I felt like she just hated me so much, it was my fault. And it began to be um, so even though she created it, it was like I reacted and responded. And those were the things that were used against me, right? As far as what we can't help to take care of. We can't, meaning when they said that we couldn't provide for her mental health needs, even though she created those issues, it was like, I remember her saying that those issues stemmed from like uh pre-adoption, like having been abandoned by my biological mother. And my biological mother was on drugs and drinking alcohol when she was pregnant. And so I don't know there's what is it, fetal alcohol syndrome?
Yeah, that's
And
it.
so I remember her mentioning that and saying that my mental health was due to that. And instead of really taking responsibility, and she may not have even seen it, which is why I mentioned the whole mental health pieces. But it was just a lot. It was to the point where like she had created this story. When DFACS finally got involved, they went to DFACS. It wasn't like DFACS came and there was a report. It was like they got them involved. And at the time, for about a year, I had been sleeping in the bathroom with an alarm on the door. Now it was better than a cage, but I was sleeping in a bathroom with one little storage thing that you buy from like Walmart or something, with like about two shirts, two pairs of jeans. And there was an alarm on the door. And every day at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, she would turn it off and let me out. And then every day around 5 or 6 p.m. at night, she would put me back in the bathroom and put the alarm on. And came up with reasons why. It was like, oh, I was a threat to my siblings, or she wouldn't feed me. So there were days where I went without it. So like if I could, I would sneak it. And so like sneaking was like a slice of bread and like some mayonnaise and mustard on it. And I would eat that. Or like around this time, I don't know if y'all remember like the school fundraisers where they would sell these chocolate bars.
Yeah.
And so like what my mother would do was instead of selling them, she would just buy boxes of them. So like my siblings always won, but we wouldn't be doing anything with them. So like if there were times where there were like days, like weeks where I would eat once a week, or like days where she wouldn't feed me at all. And those were always under the cabinet. So I would go and take those, but not thinking about like, all right, eventually they're going to start disappearing and she's going to start noticing. And so that was like, those were some of the things. It was like she created the narrative and built the story and sold it to DFACS and they bought it. And so to DFACS, it was like, they're doing this for the safety of their family and they're treating her like this. And this is my understanding, because my thought is y'all never questioned them. But it was like, okay, I ended up in foster care. They sold the story. She manipulated it, made it seem like I had all these issues from during childbirth and being a few weeks old to like, we've provided her everything and she still has these problems and we just can't help her. So it's a lot. And I recognize it's also a lot to take in, but it's a lot.
No, I hear it, but my first thought is what did your father say?
I'm sorry. Go ask Miss Joy.
No, it's fine. You do your parenting thing.
So my dad, he was a computer engineer. So as I stated before, he traveled a lot. And in his traveling, that meant he was gone most of the week. He would come back on a weekend. And he was just very accepting of, I remember the first time that I recognized that she pretty much had him. It was like, he wasn't there. So like she would explain like, oh, she's in trouble again because she did this or she did that or she did this. And instead of asking or questioning or talking to me, he believed everything. And and it just, I don't know, like it's it's the reason why I have some issues now in certain relationships, but he didn't protect me. He didn't keep me safe. He just went along with everything she said. So I mean, it took both of them to sign those paperwork to relinquish parental rights. And so he did it. And to preface, like I wasn't the first adopted kid that they got rid of. I was the second. So they adopted three of us. They had two biological, and they got rid of one when I was 5. We were both around the same age. So he was 5, I was 5. So when I was 5, they got rid of him. And then a few years later, ended up putting me back in foster care.
And people wonder why I'm so hard on when I do adoption training. It's like, yeah, both y'all and your families have to be in on this, because like, what if something happens to you, but you can't, I don't know, I don't understand the point of getting jealous of a kid because they have a father. Like I don't get it, but maybe that's some mental health thing that I haven't had. Even though I don't like making it. It's a tough one for me to try and make some logic around it.
Yeah. I mean, even still, like, even with maybe the issues, I don't think that I honestly can't sit and defend it. Like I mean, obviously I've been through it twice. And so I think that no matter what comes up in it and what situations that you have to deal with, or what support that child may need, when you sign that paperwork, it's a done deal. It's supposed to be, this is my kid forever. And no matter what, because you'll do it for your biological child, right?
Yeah.
And no matter what, whether it's supposed, I can't, I guess what I'm saying is I have no understanding for it. So in any family, I would never be able to say, I get it. I get that you couldn't do this. I get that. I wouldn't. And I'm a pretty open-minded person, but in this type of situation,
yeah, I don't know. So, all right. So you came back into care. What age was that again?
13.
Like after
13, yeah.
13.
Yeah.
So fresh teenager back into care. Like where did you go from? Like, how was that transition?
You know, initially, so I've actually never told anybody this. I'm going to share on this podcast. So, you know, things in my home had gotten so bad to the point that I just remember at that age, around 13, well, before that, just really wishing something would happen to me. So hoping that somehow I would get taken out of the house, right? And I remember one day just wishing, like, I just wish I could go into foster care. Had no idea what the heck I was wishing for, right? But I was so broken and so gone to the point that, like, honestly, if I hadn't entered foster care, I probably wouldn't be alive today. But I'm saying that to say that I remember the exact day. It was August in 2006. Well, I don't remember the date. I just remember it was August of 2006. And 2006, like, it was just a very defining year for me. And so I didn't know. I just remember I didn't know. So I had no idea what was going on. I know that pretty much a, a specific situation exploded. My mother found out that I had been hurting myself, but she found out from somebody else. So she had to act surprised and found out that I had been hurting myself. And so what she did was to add to the narrative was put me in a psychiatric hospital. So this was the second experience with them. So the first one, they put me in a private psychiatric placement. And the second time they put me in a public. I didn't know that at the time, but because I know which one it is, it's a public psychiatric hospital. So the thought was, we're going to put you here to get some help. And so while I was there, you can make phone calls, once a day. And so I would call her and be like, Mom, come get me, come get me. And I remember that. And I remember speaking to a social worker there and, and my therapist and sharing. And I never shared about, like, I always took responsibility for it. So I would never share about what was going on in the home because I was terrified of my mother. So I would take full responsibility and say that I'm not grateful and I have these problems and I'm doing this for no reason. And so I just remember being told pretty much that I was on the phone with my mom during my stay. It's a very short stay, and she was just like, baby, you're not coming home right away, blah, blah, blah. And so I didn't understand that, but I was like, okay. She was like, you need to get more help, yada, yada, yada. And so the very next day I met with the person that was ended up being my case manager, but I didn't know. And pretty much she was just like, we're going to move you here. This is what's going to happen. You're going to be away for a little bit. And after that, I actually never saw my family again.
Mm.
They, huh?
I don't mean to cut you off, but I was like, thank God. But like, they didn't, like, your teachers at school, they didn't know anything, or like that you was being locked in the bathroom at night and that you wasn't eating or anything like that. Like,
no, I was very good at, like, school was a safe haven for me. So I tended, is that a word? I tended to get really close to my teachers, but I didn't share it. And it was a mix of this. My mom, I grew up understanding the image was very important for my mom. And so our family was that, like, everybody knew the Calvos, like my kids, my siblings and I were in school around the same time a lot. And so everybody knew the Calvos. My parents were at all the meetings, were always donating time and money and whatever. So she was big on that. And so I followed suit. It was like, I didn't share. I showed in every kind of way. Like, I was crying for help in my actions, but people didn't know. And I didn't know that's what it was. But and so no, no one knew. I did very good at, you know me, Anthony. I'm really good at saving face, right? I'm really good at like, everything's great. Everything's really good and could be completely falling apart. I think that's like, and I think that's, unfortunately, that's also, it only got better as I began to get older in foster care. It's almost like a skill that you learn while in foster care, right?
yeah, like, quit asking me questions.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I'm good. We're good. But yeah, nobody knew. I think I was just good at that. I later on found out that there were certain people that were like, you just disappeared. Like, one day we saw you and the next day you just disappeared. And we would ask your sister and she couldn't say anything. And that's really what happened. I went to one of my first placements, didn't know that was the placement at the time, didn't know it was a placement. And I guess I can say it. I went to Kids Peace. It was my first placement at the time. And it was there that I met with my therapist and one of the times. And and I remember going to meet him for one of my scheduled visits, and he had a box. It was this really pretty, flowery, butterflies on it, and it was a box. And pretty much he was just like, this is for you, open it up. And it was a care packet from my family And it was they wrote this letter pretty much telling me they relinquished their parental rights and I would never come home again. I didn't talk on the phone with them. I didn't have a conversation. They talked to me like at the beginning stage of my, like the first month of my stay at Kids Peace. And I would like call them during my like calling times. And they never mentioned it. And like my mom would be the one to lead the call. And if I asked to talk to somebody else, she'd be like, oh, every time I remember her saying, your dad's not here, your dad's not here, which I think was probably intentional. But like, she would let me talk to my sister, maybe my brother every now and then, but she controlled who I spoke to. And that happened for about a month where during those times, and then I didn't hear from them again. And then the next time I heard was through a letter and a care packet box that had like because I like to write, it had like a cute little notepad, some pencils. It had like a key from a Christian bookstore. My mom was big on like that kind of stuff. And this Max Lucado book from a Christian bookstore. And Max Lucado just got a shout out plug here. Yeah. And a letter. And it pretty much said, we can't take, I didn't understand it all. I just know it said like, we relinquished our parental rights and we are unable to take care of you and your mental health. And I think the state could do better, blah, blah, blah. And she signed it, mom and dad, but she signed it. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I was told I would never go back home again. Which, as you can see, that's why the therapist handled it. But
I'm traumatized just visual. I have a very active imagination. And I'm traumatized just visualizing, like really, like I don't know. So the therapist knew what was in the box.
Yeah, you can't. They have, when you get a package at a place like that, they have to go through it.
And no, I get that. I visited young people that were out there at Kids Peace, so I understand that. But my thought was the therapist knew what was in the box and didn't think that would be traumatizing to a kid going down the line. Like, I don't know. You're supposed to brace for impact. Like, you just can't, I don't know.
I mean, I think, yeah. And I think maybe that was nothing against Kids Peace, but maybe at the time that was like, that's the reason why, as long as we have a therapist around. Because I do remember, like, I had a session and he was like, how are you feeling? But I also know me at that age, I had learned to suppress everything and I wasn't vocal. I wasn't vocal at that age yet. Like that was when I first came into foster care. I feel like my mother had silenced me. She had muted me. And so I wasn't vocal. I wasn't vocal about feelings. I was very like still in this idea, that image was so important. And then on the outside, you needed to look okay. You needed to seem okay. And so I do remember just being like, yeah, and him asking like, how do you feel? I'm like, I guess this is what's gonna happen. Like, I didn't know. I think, to be honest, if I'm really honest about my feelings at that time, I think I was confused. I think, or I was in the middle of like being, feeling abandoned but being happy at the same time because I was terrified of my mother. And I do feel like if I had ever gone back home again, I would not be here talking to you all today. So I think it was mixed feelings, but at the time, I think I was just like, okay, I'm good. And I let me tell y'all, all the places I've been in, all the therapists I've seen, I learned how to make a therapist believe that I was okay. Mm-hmm. Because I had to believe it somehow, right?
Yeah, it's just put it out there. It is possible to fool therapists, like
it is,
especially when you don't want to talk. Like,
yep, especially when you're forced to talk to therapists that like it's just because it's the therapist for that placement or it's the place, the closest place. Whereas as an adult now, and I am in therapy, I got to choose. I got to kind of vet my therapist and figure out like, is this who I wanted? But yeah, little head. But yeah, I was a pro at that. I could give a one-on-one class on how to pick your therapist. I would never do it now. So those listening and paying attention, no. As an advocate and now as an alum of foster care, no. I understand and appreciate the importance of therapy, but at that time, you know, it was just like, I got to keep making it, got to keep going. And somehow I have to convince myself too that I'm okay.
What, I don't know. I think I asked myself this question too. But what could your therapist have done to get you to open up to him or her, so that you could let all of that hurt, like that hurt and disappointment out?
To be honest, Anthony, at that stage of my life, nothing. Nothing. I don't think that there was, I think suppressing and acting like I was okay was a need in order for me to keep going. And I don't think that there was anything he could have done. I had my mind set, and you can't break 10 years of trauma in like one session, two sessions.
Mhm.
And I was only at Kids Peace for 6 months, which I remember, I don't know if this is still the same at the time. It's like technically a year-long program, 12 months. And I was only there for 6 months. So I assume it happened like in the middle of my stay. But you can't, yeah, like I said, you can't break 10 years worth of trauma in like a few sessions. And so I don't think that there's anything he could have done.
Yeah.
And so looking back on it now, do you think that? Well, I guess first question is, from your viewpoint, what is Kids Peace, or what type of place was that? And then from your viewpoint, do you think that was the best placement for you at that particular point in your life?
What was the first part of the question? I'm sorry.
What was that placement? Like, what type of placement was that for those that
So the technical, I don't know. I think what I understood, what is it, was a what is the word I'm looking for? Like a therapeutic residential group home, something like that. I mean, I definitely was on lockdown. Like I had to earn the privilege to go outside. It took me about 2 months to get off of like blue privileges to like green privileges, which was at the top. But maybe 3 months, let's say it like that. But I knew it was that. Like a lockdown facility that you have to earn those privileges to be able to see the daylight. Thinking about it now, I don't think that it was the best first placement. I think that was the placement for me because I was coming out of a psychiatric hospital for self-harm. And I had admittedly talked about suicidal ideation and wanting to pursue something. And so I trying to be understandable. I can understand why that may have been the initial choice, but it wasn't a good choice. You know, to take, you know, honestly, if you think about it, I went from being locked down in one place, having an alarm on the door and having to sleep in the bathroom, to being locked down in another place. I just didn't have that specific warden, my mom, you know? So maybe at that point, my life, I was used to it, but I don't think, like thinking now again, I don't think it was the right placement. I think that it could have been a step down or a few steps down. I think it needed to be therapeutic focused, but I don't think it needed to be in a lockdown facility like that.
And so when did you start noticing kind of letting go of yourself, letting go of those past traumas?
Ooh. Joseph. I had aged out of foster care by then. And honestly, I didn't start this process of understanding the effect of my trauma, like the effect that my experiences and the trauma had on me as over the years, and how it still like manifested as I became an adult. I don't think that I'll say it like this. I don't think that the healing started until after I had my daughter. And that may sound really cliche and so cute and whatever, but having my child really just naturally healed a lot in me. I think it was more of this, I grew up desiring, needing, and all the placements that I had and all the foster homes that I was in, needing a mother figure, right? And so I becoming a mom, I remember when I became a mom, like that desire and that need for a mother kind of disappeared. I became that mother I always wish I had. And the love was just so healing. It didn't heal everything, but the small things that it could fill, the small holes that it could fill in the interim, it worked, but it worked, meaning it then required me to look deeper inward, and all the other traumas started surfacing. And then only as my child has gotten older and she's 4 now, but it has caused, it has caused me to directly focus on certain parts of my trauma right now. And I still have a long way to go. I started.
Oh, we all do.
Yeah. I started going back to therapy in 2018. And I learned a lot. And meaning I learned that there's different types of therapies. And a lot of people feel like there's just one therapist. You go and you talk.
Can I use this a little bit?
Yes, you go. Sorry. Make sure you go and you talk to someone. But like, there are talk therapists. There are therapists that specialize in trauma healing and working through that. And there are therapists that specialize in domestic violence and all this other stuff, right? And so when I learned that, and I decided, okay, I need to go see somebody. I've picked a therapist that focused in on, I wanted to work on my trauma because it was starting to show, not in a bad way. It was just starting to, it was like the wound was open and I was waiting for it to like scab over again, but it never did.
Yeah, that reminds me of the work of Henry Nouwen, his work, The Wounded Healer, that, oftentimes when you look at caregivers and those who are doing great good out in the world, they themselves have been wounded in similar ways that you have.
Yeah. So it's I still have a long, long way to go. And I was told when I started with my therapist, she was like, there is a lot of truth behind things are going to get worse before it gets better. And so I've taken breaks. I'm on a break right now because it's a lot. It's like I open one door and we work on that. And when I first started, I was opening a lot of doors. And but I also still, like, I'm still a mom. I'm a single mom. I still have to work. I work 9 to 5. If I was picking up a part-time job at the time, that was it. And so I still have a life, and trying to heal and deal with my trauma head on was hard, and it was taking its toll on me. And I was, it was beginning to be too much. And so I've taken breaks. And she told me, and even to this day, she'll still say, like, you've got to push though, but I'm only human, right? And you got to imagine there's like years of stuff, years of stuff. And it's not something that just was created overnight. So, yeah, so I'm still working. Still got a long way to go.
Do you find it difficult to kind of give yourself permission to rest and relax?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very hard. I used to have this idea that, and I still do sort of, but I'm working on trying to give myself some grace. This idea that because of my past, because I grew up in foster care, because I aged out, and because I've had to do all this stuff early. I should be so much so further along in my life and my healing
Yeah.
thing and,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
career and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, like I'm still so very hard on myself, but I have had to learn to give myself some grace in that. Um, and even at times look at it differently and like, well, maybe because you went through all of that, you didn't have the ability to just develop and grow at your own pace and at the pace of a normal teenager or kid or 18, 19. Yeah, most of them are still at home with their parents. you know um so sometimes that thought works and sometimes it doesn't. Depends on the day. You good, Anthony? I can't hear you. You're being awfully quiet over there. No, Georgia Empowerment came on, so
That's weird. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, it's weird. I'm absorbing. I'm absorbing everything and listening to it. I don't know. I guess for me, since like of course I'm not in foster care, but we still work with young people all the time, and I guess a question, a selfless question, is how do I, or what are some things that I should look for in for a young person to better so that I can be aware of if a young person may be going through something and they're self-harming or thinking about self-ending or what have you, or what type of questions should I ask, or should I ask questions, or I don't know, like what's that line?
So you're asking me for some tips on how to work with a young person that deals with self-harming?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or how do I identify? Outside of the obvious.
Right. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that, how to identify it, other than I guess because if they want you to know, you're going to know. But if they don't want you to know, you're not going to know. And so I think, and I can only go off of my experience. I think that when it was known that I was hurting myself, I wasn't approached with any, in my mind, it didn't feel like I was approached with any sympathy or empathy or trying to understand or let's talk, what's going on? What do you need? I was treated like there were experiences where I was handcuffed and I was chained and I was kept in like certain spaces where, like I felt like not a person, not a human, not someone with not a kid in the situation that I was in. And I wasn't approached with what's going on? Like, talk to me. Like, even after having come into foster care, no one, I never got a chance to share my side.
Nobody asked you why?
No. So it was kind of like and we hear this often, everything that was put in the file is what everybody went off of. And instead of asking me, and like, you can read the file and see, all right, your parents relinquished parental rights. What happened? You know what I'm saying? Like, simply asking, that is my biggest thing these days. And talking to other youth that have been in foster care and aged out of foster care, not youth, adults now, is the question, like, what happened? Like, not what's wrong with you or what did you do? It's like, what happened? And I can't tell you how many times I got the question, like, what did you do?
Yeah.
And I'm like, and it was like, I'm a kid, I'm a child. What do you mean? Like, I didn't just come out of the womb cutting myself. Like, I'm sorry, but, and not to be light about it. It's just, I was never asked what happened. And I think that, you know, again, as I stated, if they want you to know, you're going to know. If they don't want you to know, you won't know. Because too often when they want you to know and they show you the answer, the response is, you're doing it for attention. Well, yeah, I'm doing it for attention, but it's not always in a negative way. If I need to get your attention and let you know that I need some help. But that has always been the response, is like, they're attention seeking. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, even from case managers talking about, because, you know, I still work in this field of child welfare, and case managers and life coaches, where they respond and they say, or in the notes, it's always like attention seeking youth, you know, and it's just a bad narrative, you know. And so I think, go ahead.
No, finish.
I was just about to say, just providing a safe space to talk. And we use safe space so much these days, right? But providing a space where it feels like it's not going to be judgmental. It's you just sitting and saying, what happened to you? And even in my experience, the therapists that I would go and see, none of them asked. So it's kind of like you're not doing your job, first of all. And then if you are too busy trying to figure out, okay, how can we medicate you? Which was my experience. How can we medicate you to get you to kind of be compliant and make it through this and be able to keep a placement, instead of trying to figure out the root of everything and, you know, all that good stuff. But what happened? I'm going to keep reiterating that, because it's a simple question, but it's very rarely used, you know?
Yeah, and I find that in our shared line of work, often what leads to that healing and sense of wholeness is understanding that the causes of your depression and anxiety and whatnot are understandable.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. And you're not alone in this. And you're worth something. You're actually worth something, you know? I often find myself wanting to scream you know, that at anytime I get a new case, and it's just like, come on, just listen to this kiddo.
Yeah, just listen. What can I do?
Yeah, and I don't know, like I do. I think I've heard, well, I hear that a lot, especially when they say, oh, they're just attention seeking.
Yeah.
But why? Like the question, the follow-up should be, but why? Why are they seeking attention?
Or
like
why do you think that they're not worthy of your attention?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even and also knowing that, like, not just stopping at the question of like what happened, but hold on one second.
Oh, you got
hello.
Oh God, I'm so sorry.
They say that parenting is a healing process, and that it's cliche, and it's cliche for a reason.
Yeah.
And we just saw a real life example.
Exactly. Exactly. No, I love it. But what was I saying?
So
not just stopping at what happened, like not just stopping at asking that question, because a lot of times I've heard, you know, when I've heard, it may have not have been what happened, you know, because I think that many times I have responded to someone saying, what did you do, by trying to say something or trying to tell part of my story. But a lot of times if you ask what happened, follow-up is not, is not saying, all right, now you got to let that go. You know, that's not a proper follow-up to hearing a young person tell you what happened to them, or this is what they're feeling, and then say, all right, so how are we going to move past that and let that go? How are we going to move past? Because it's almost invalidating, right?
Yeah.
And I get that that may be a natural response just in general communicating with one person to another. But like thinking about the audience, thinking about who you're speaking to, thinking about who's speaking to you, it's a youth, it's a young person that they don't know how to process it, but they're just telling you, right? They're sharing with you. There's this, that's their way of saying, this is the help that I need, without being able to say it in a intentional, very direct way. It's just, I'm telling you what happened. And so to answer with, well, how are we going to move forward? How are you going to move on? I have heard so many, like, let's bury this. Let's have this,
Right.
let's have this event that you're burying it, you're letting it go. And it's like, yeah, no, like one conversation is not going to make all that go away. Now, it may
The
make
brain
it
doesn't work that
because
way.
what I have heard you, what I have gotten out of this conversation is that you don't really care. You're just like, look, how can we move on from this? Because this is